Osage elders conduct a mournful ceremony inside a village hut and bury a ceremonial pipe. This ritual is a tradition of mourning for their descendants, who assimilate into the white American community. Little Molly, the young girl, is peeping in, and it's the season of the flower moon. Later, the Osage people discover oil on their land, making them the wealthiest per capita in the country, more than any other place in the USA. They own many buildings and have chauffeurs galore. Despite this, the U.S. Congress deems them incompetent and assigns guardians to control their wealth. Ernest Burkhart is back from World War I, and he loves to pull a long frown. He returns to Fairfax. Many men are applying to work as oilmen, hoping to get rich. While going about his business, he sees a fight, and, as a joke, joins in by beating one of the fighters. He's picked up by Henry Roan, who is also an Osage, and he is taken to his uncle William King Hale, who's known for his affection for the Osage. Ernest asks Henry whose land it is, and Henry replies that it's his. William King welcomes them with his Aunt Myrtle and Cousin Willie. King says the wealth won't last forever. His house wasn't built with oil money. Ernest talks about his time during the war, but he isn't exactly a soldier. He is a cook and sees a lot of sick people. William tells him that there's plenty of money flowing around. King insists on being called King, not like royalty, but as a middle name. He is referred to as the King of the Osage Hills anyway. He asks if Ernest likes women, and Ernest says he likes them all, no matter their color or size. And yes, this is fiction. Leo D. doesn't mention age preferences, but that's a story for another day. King warns Ernest about the people there, seeing him as innocent and simple. He advises Ernest to avoid trouble and gives him a book on Osage culture and history. King explains the Osage's legacy of discovering black gold, oil. Later, an Osage member chokes on his own saliva, seemingly poisoned, while seizing on the floor. Footage shows members of the Osage Nation in the United States with their identities revealed. Many Osage were mysteriously murdered, with numerous passings ruled as offing themselves without proper investigation. One piece of footage shows a woman being shot in cold blood by a man from inside her house, with the gun planted in her hand. Molly Kyle is a wealthy Osage woman who struggles to access her funds for medication due to the restrictions imposed by her family's guardian. Her mother is sick, and Molly, who is diabetic and has an abscess, has had an operation. However, Mr. Beatty is scrutinizing the family's expenses and finds them outrageous. Molly remains calm, but she is annoyed as hell, and you can tell. The Osage community is required to have their white guardians manage their finances before they can access their family's money. Meanwhile, some of the white people are charging $40 for photographs, which is an insane amount. Many community members get their photos taken, and they turn out exceptionally well. Some white people are also taking advantage of the community's kindness and always appealing to their sense of humanity. Ernest picks up Molly in his cab. Ernest's soldier buddy, Kelsey Morrison, who has married a full-blood native, also appears. Ernest mistakenly identifies her as a Sky people, but Molly corrects him, saying she's from the Middle Water. A car race grabs everyone's attention, including Ernest's, but Molly tells him that if he doesn't have money for the race, they should move on. Molly heads to the church first, and this time, she allows Ernest to assist her into the car, unlike before. Ernest Burkhart meets Molly while driving his cab and is encouraged by his uncle, William King Hale, to pursue her romantically. Molly Kyle and her family own the headlights to the estate where the oil is flowing, so the entire clan has moolah. Ernest is told by the king that he is marrying for money. King explains that through marriage, the flow of money from the estate can be directed to them. Ernest strikes up a conversation with Molly, but she comments that he talks too much. Molly seems indifferent and a bit annoyed, speaking in his language. Despite this, Ernest manages to make her laugh. Ernest starts to immerse himself in Osage history and culture. He later becomes involved in armed robberies with his brother Byron and another cowboy. They rob an Osage couple, stealing jewelry and watches. Ernest, always eager for money, bets it all but loses. This is where the movie title, The Flower Moon, comes from. The tiny flowers over the Blackjack Hills in the prairie, which are beautiful on a field. The murderer will come later. It also explains that Wakanta, which sounds like Wakanda, means God. Ernest grows closer to Molly. She gifts him an expensive-looking cowboy hat and invites him to dinner. Molly doesn't eat because she has had a lot of sugar. Her mother, Lizzie, seems indifferent to white people and doesn't acknowledge Ernest. Molly is the only one living with her mother, so she can take care of her. Molly asks Ernest about his intentions to live in Fairfax. They start to get to know each other better. Things become personal when Ernest asks why Molly doesn't have a husband. She doesn't answer, but offers him whiskey. Ernest gets caught in the rain, and as he is about to drink whiskey, Molly says they need to stay quiet for a while because the storm is powerful. Ernest is Catholic but rarely goes to church. However, Molly convinces him to attend. Molly is amused by Ernest's naivety. After church, there's an activity. Bill Smith's wife seems to be perishing, looking painfully sick. The Osage women talk, especially about Ernest. Molly and Ernest end up making out in the car. Ernest asks Molly to marry him. Later, King and Ernest have a conversation in which King asks if Ernest can handle Molly's kindness, but Ernest insists he really likes Molly. They eventually marry in an Osage ceremony with Catholic elements, celebrating their wedding with traditions from both cultures. Later, King approaches Minnie, who is crying, and asks if she is all right. He reassures her that she will be fine. However, Minnie is really sick and unfortunately, she perishes later on. Minnie is Molly's sister and succumbs to a wasting illness. Bill asks Ernest to stay out of the house for a while, so he does. While outside with King, King hints that Bill might be involved in Minnie's passing, as the rights would pass to him instead of Molly. King subtly suggests that with Lizzie almost sick and perishing, and the rest of Molly's family passing away, all the head rights will eventually go to Ernest and King's family, which will increase their wealth. Molly and Ernest have a baby. King suggests targeting Anna, but she carries a gun around. King mentions that Anna might end up deceased due to picking a fight with the wrong person. Their daughter grows up, and the family expands with marriages. After more explorations, Ernest and Molly's life briefly returns to normal. Lizzie, Molly's mother, sees an owl by the window and warns that it signifies the end for their family. She blames Molly for marrying a white man. Lizzie expresses love for Anna, but not for Molly. Molly walks away, and later, Anna, who comes home drunk, tries to sit on Byron's lap, leading to a fight. Molly and Ernest separate their respective chaotic siblings. Byron flirts with one of the maids in front of Anna. Anna draws her gun, but Ernest disarms her quickly. Another Osage passes away, shot in the head. Byron and Ernest speak in codes about how Byron will kill Anna. Anna spends her last moments with Lizzie, her mother. Anna is strong-willed and tough, in contrast to Molly. Byron drives Anna and reconciles with Byron. Officers arrive to inform Molly about her sister, and she is brought to a creek where Anna is identified. Her corpse is found shot in the woods. Molly is super devastated. What is crazy is that the doctors, the Shawn brothers, her head to look for bullets. The Osage tribe chiefs gather a council to discuss the recent murders. The blaming shifts to white people for the violence. They raise money as a reward for any information that might lead to solving the cases. The tribe also expresses frustration with the white men who come to the reservation and are being sleazy and trying to marry young women. They find these men useless and arrogant. The council advises the community to stand up for themselves and rely on each other rather than depending on the council or the government. A reward is offered for information about Anna's slayer, and a detective is hired. King pledges to donate money to increase the reward. During the funeral arrangements, Anna leaves money to Lizzie, Molly, and Rita. Bill Smith, Minnie's husband, is now married to Rita, another of Molly's sisters. If that is not suspicious at all. Detective McBride starts investigating the murders, but receives a letter demanding he stop his work. When he goes outside, he is stabbed to his end. Molly hires a private investigator, Bill Burns, who takes over the case and points the finger at Bill. Smith, who has married both of Molly's sisters, is conducting his own investigation, which Molly is aware of. The investigator also reveals that Anna is pregnant. He shares details on what Bill Smith has uncovered. Ernest secretly shares his findings with King. Meanwhile, Anna's grave is vandalized, and the jewelry buried with her is stolen. Ernest knows that Blackie is behind the grave disturbance. He confronts Blackie and coerces him into a plan to kill his wife's sister, Rita. As payment, Ernest allows Blackie to steal his car and use the insurance payout for the theft. Molly is stressed by the whole situation and questions Ernest's love for her. Ernest reassures her. Meanwhile, a new expensive insulin from Canada is arranged for Molly and is administered to her. Just before the planned murder could happen, Blackie gets arrested. King arrives to see Ernest, but he's not his usual sunny self. King, furious, reprimands Ernest for losing control and making things worse. He physically punishes Ernest for failing to manage his wife, Molly, and for the botched plan to kill Bill Smith and the sisters. The situation becomes more intense when news breaks about the 1921 Tulsa Massacre, a large-scale, racially motivated attack on Black people. This news raises fears among the Osage that something similar might happen to them. Later, Ernest and King seek help from Henry Grammer. Grammer suggests hiring A.C. Kirby, an explosives expert who can blow up vaults to get the money. Ernest lets doctors administer insulin to Molly, who becomes emotional and distrustful of them. Ernest, overwhelmed, breaks down and insults Molly's culture and traditions. He ends up administering insulin to Molly himself. King takes Henry Roan to the doctor for a checkup. While Henry feels depressed, his physical health is fine. The doctor, who is part of King's scheme, notes that if Henry perishes by offing himself, it will be hard to justify. King reveals that he's the beneficiary of Henry's life insurance policy, which won't pay out if Henry croaks by himself. So, King makes sure Henry doesn't take his own life. Henry is feeling depressed and wants to buy liquor or a gun. He also suspects a butcher of having an affair with his wife, leading him to attack the butcher. Then he goes to the bank to claim his own money in a rowdy mood. King tells Ernest that Henry Roan was actually Molly's first husband when they were still very young. Lizzie starts seeing visions of her ancestors, who seem to guide her away. Lizzie eventually passes away. Molly confides in King about hiring a private investigator, who is already deceased, unaware that Ernest and Byron hacked Bill Burns lifeless. They also announce that Molly is pregnant again, but King looks disappointed. Later, Henry Roan arrives at dinner to talk to King. King berates him because Molly's pregnancy means she will live a bit longer. Ernest, however, believes Henry will still have a claim to the family's wealth. Ernest coerces John into making Henry's passing look like he shot himself. During an Osage parade, Ernest and John pass by the Ku Klux Klan. Ernest introduces John to Henry, who then takes Henry out to drink and spend money on alcohol and women. While Henry is drunk, John shoots him in the back of the skull, and quite far. He takes the gun, which is a really bad move if he wants to stage it as an offing himself. So the lie they are trying to sell is that Henry twists his arm at the back of his head and stretches really far, and shoots himself instead of just at the temple or at his forehead. Then solidifies the lie by making the gun disappear. Genius! Ernest announces Henry's passing to Molly, convincing her that Henry took his own due to his persistent sadness. But Molly is not quite convinced, although evidence shows that Henry has attempted to off himself. With the recent murders, she believes Henry might have been murdered too. After Henry's murder, Ernest and King argue about the supposed. King advises the butcher, whom Henry had fought with, to leave town to avoid being blamed for the murder. However, the butcher ignores King's advice, and this disrupts King's plan to frame him. Molly gives birth to their third child, Anna. A lifeless dog is found on their porch, and Bill investigates. Rita talks to Molly about taking a trip, but Molly, due to her condition, declines. Tensions rise between Bill and Ernest, with passive-aggressive remarks about their possessions due to the wealth they have acquired through marrying the sisters. Ernest confronts Bill, who subtly accuses Ernest and Byron of being murderers. Ernest gives the go-ahead for A.C. Kirby's job to eliminate Bill Smith and Rita. He contacts John to hire Kirby. An explosion wakes Molly and Ernest, so Ernest rushes out to see Bill and Rita's house destroyed. Bill, who is still alive but gravely injured, pleads to be shot. Ernest, in shock, watches others attend to Rita's mangled body, brain vomiting at the back of her head. Overwhelmed, Ernest returns home, where his family waits. Ernest does not say anything, but his face has subtitles. Molly, realizing her sister's passing, screams in agony. Following Rita's passing, Molly visits Washington to seek President Coolidge's assistance in investigating the Osage murders. However, she feels unheard and ignored by the president. Unbeknownst to Molly, her deteriorating health is not solely due to diabetes but also from poison administered by Ernest and King, with complicit doctors, the Shawn brothers. The poison is meant to slowly end her without arousing suspicion. Molly becomes increasingly paranoid and weak, fearing she is the next target. Anna falls ill with a whooping cough, so Molly sends her to relatives until she recovers. Distrusting the Shawn brothers, Molly rearranges who prepares her food and handles her insulin, and she entrusted it to Ernest, the actual person trying to end her. While lying in bed, Molly sees the same owl her mother saw earlier, signifying her own approaching demise. She tells Ernest she is seeing her mother. Ernest offers comfort as he administers another insulin injection. Shortly after, a man knocks on the door, revealing Tom White from the Bureau of Investigation. Ernest learns that the tribal council sought help from the U.S. government, leading to agents being sent to investigate the Osage murders. The agent asks to speak with Molly, but Ernest, hesitant to let him in, explains that Molly is resting after her diabetes medication and suggests he return on Friday. Panicked, Ernest rushes to find King to inform him about the arrival of the federal agents. King is chilling at a festival, sees Ernest's agitation, and advises him to calm down and take a seat before excusing himself. Neither realizes they are being watched. A newcomer, a Native American named John Wren, arrives in town looking for his family. Tom White begins his investigation by talking to the tribe. The chief is furious with the government's delayed response, especially since they only started investigating after the Osage donated $20,000. The following day, King visits the insurance agency to claim the money from Henry Roan's policy, but is denied. He tries to intimidate the employee with his influence, but his efforts fail, leaving him frustrated and angry. John Wren comes into the agency after King exits. As King heads back to his ranch, he meets C.J. Robinson and hires him for a job to burn his ranch. Meanwhile, Molly is in severe pain, her condition worsening, and she could expire at any moment. The agents question the Shawn brothers about the exhumation of Anna's body, noting that the bullet wasn't found. The brothers claim that chopping up the body is part of Indian culture, but the agents remain suspicious. Tom White approaches King with questions, but King evades them, leading Tom around in circles and telling him that the victims just met bad luck. Tom is unconvinced that the murders are just bad luck, especially if it is close to 30 victims meeting the same bad luck. When King refuses to answer more questions because the setting is inappropriate, the agent agrees to meet with King later. To cover his tracks, King decides to eliminate some of his hired men by setting them up, starting with Blackie, who has just been released from prison. King tells him that government agents are snooping around town and need his help. King hires him for a bank robbery but is botched due to a shootout with the cops. Blackie is not shot though, unfortunately, but he is taken away again. Then with A.C. Kirby, who is responsible for the explosion at the Smiths' home, King pays off A.C. Kirby, but Kirby is worried about the increased government presence. King gives Kirby a final job robbing a store. Earlier, King warns the store owner of a possible robbery, so he is armed, expecting the robbers. When Kirby and his associate, Henry Grammer, attempt the robbery, the owner immediately murders Kirby. Henry manages to escape, but later crashes his car. The Bureau starts questioning people about the recent incidents, causing a stir. King talks to an increasingly paranoid Ernest, urging him to sign some papers just in case anything goes wrong. King reassures him that nothing will happen, but they are unaware that one of the agents is observing them. The original federal agents gathered outside the county one night to share their findings. Tom White reveals that a witness, an old man from across the bar, sees Anna with Kelsey Morrison and Byron on the night she passed away. They have gotten Anna so drunk that the girl cannot stand on her feet. Another agent reports that Kelsey runs a dope and whiskey business and is responsible for murdering an Osage couple to inherit their money after marrying the widow. After pressing Kelsey, the agents manage to apprehend him, and Kelsey agrees to cooperate, providing information about Ernest and Byron. Their findings lead to Ernest, Byron, and King, as they always come up. The investigators also learn from a priest that Molly fears for her life, but won't reveal from whom. The mysterious John Wren comes to Fairfax looking for his Osage family and has been observing the town undercover. He turns out to be a government agent. He points out that King Hale's ranch is now burning. One of the agents, disguised as an insurance salesman, has sold King an insurance policy for his farm a few weeks ago. Now he has to pull up his salesman pants and talk to King again about insurance fraud. The Bureau of Investigation agents delve deeper into their investigation, particularly focusing on Anna, Bill, and Rita, and Henry Roan's murder. As the days pass, Ernest becomes increasingly paranoid, weighed down by the heavy guilt of his deeds. He drinks heavily, mixing poison into his drink, while watching the flames from the burning ranch. Ernest administers another dose of insulin to Molly before passing out. In the morning, Ernest is taken away and interrogated while standing. During the interrogation, Ernest is pressured to talk, but remains silent and defiant when asked about the explosion that murdered Rita and Bill. Blackie is brought into the room in handcuffs. Ernest asks for a private moment with him, which the agents grant. They are left alone, giving Ernest's bum to relax for a bit. In their conversation, Blackie advises Ernest to confess, warning him that prison will be tough and that it's better for his family if he comes clean. Blackie also makes a point to complain about the meager payment Ernest gave him for the job, calling it a ripoff compared to what he deserved. Meanwhile, King visits Molly, urging her to stay strong. However, Molly's condition is rapidly declining, and she is flatlining. Tom White tries to convince Ernest to open up, explaining that his vulnerability is making him an easy target for manipulation. Meanwhile, King decides to surrender of his own volition, hoping to prove his innocence. The agents arrest John, the guy who shot Henry. The two agents also checked on Molly, and they were horrified to see her state. Molly has not been seeing any doctor because she distrusts them. The agents carry her out of the house and rush her to the hospital to revive her. Afterward, Ernest is escorted to a car by Tom White. He learns that Molly is in the hospital. Tom White tells Ernest that they won't press charges if he agrees to testify, but he must be moved out of state for his protection. Molly is on the path to recovery, though she still lacks color in her cheeks. It's progress, but slow. The agents continue their investigation into King Hale. Blackie reveals that King promised him to escape in exchange for murdering Ernest, but that failed too. King's situation worsens as he scrambles to hire PR to clean up his image. Blackie confesses everything he knows, giving more tea that leads to King's arrest. Tom White brings Ernest to the courtroom to testify. King's lawyer, Hamilton, creates a scene, demanding to speak with Ernest and claiming to represent him. However, Hamilton can't represent both the defendant and the witness, and Ernest denies ever having known Hamilton. This causes a commotion in the court, leading to an adjournment. After the trial, Ernest is taken to meet Molly in an open field with agents nearby. Molly shows signs of improvement, and Ernest starts apologizing. Molly hugs him despite everything. Ernest is allowed to return home, but Byron takes the opportunity to arrange a meeting with King's family and their lawyer, Hamilton. Hamilton advises Ernest not to testify, using Myrtle and Willie to emotionally manipulate him. Back at home, Ernest is reunited with Molly, though the agents remain stationed outside. Molly receives a new supply of insulin, and it is clean this time. Ernest continues to deny his role in poisoning her, repeating what Hamilton has drilled into him. Like the government conspiracy stuff, he vows to protect his uncle by refusing to testify. However, the agents arrest Ernest for the murders of Bill and Rita, breaking his deal with the government. During the subsequent trial, Molly attends and hears Kelsey Morrison testify about how he and Byron murdered Anna Brown on King's orders. Kelsey recounts the details of the murder, with no visible remorse, as he describes how Byron forced Anna into the woods and Kelsey shot her from behind. The second trial concludes with these revelations. One of Molly and Ernest's children tragically perishes from whooping cough. Tom White visits Ernest in prison to deliver the news. Although Tom White doesn't specify which child has passed away, Ernest deduces it is Anna because she is always sick. Upon hearing about the loss, Ernest screams in anguish and breaks down in pain. King is also in the same prison, just across from Ernest's cell. Tom White tells King about the bad news, which King prays over. Ernest is escorted back to Fairfax to attend his child's funeral. After the funeral, he returns to prison and talks to King. He decides to testify and confess everything in the upcoming trial. King tries to sway Ernest from confessing, clinging to the hope that his fake charity will somehow save him. Ernest tells King that the Osage community will no longer support him. This ends Ernest's relationship with his uncle. During the trial, Ernest is asked about his involvement in asking A.C. Kirby to plant the explosives that murdered Bill and Rita. He admits that King is the mastermind behind the Osage murders and confirms their plan to eliminate every member of Molly's family, including Molly herself, to inherit their fortune. The lawyer questions Ernest about his wife Molly and whether he benefited from the end of her family members. Despite the scheme, Ernest insists that he has married Molly because he truly loves her. When Molly confronts Ernest about the poisoned insulin shots, he denies any involvement. This forces Molly to leave Ernest. The movie concludes with a dramatic radio broadcast summarizing the Osage Native American murders. The Shawn brothers, implicated in providing poison to Ernest to mix with Molly's insulin and connected to other incidents of demise, avoid prosecution due to lack of evidence. Byron, meanwhile, escapes prison time because the jury is undecided. William King Hale receives a life sentence but continues to claim his innocence. In 1947, he was paroled for good behavior, but reportedly due to political favors. Though barred from returning to Oklahoma, he visits relatives and expires at 87 in an Arizona nursing home. Ernest is sentenced to life imprisonment, but is later granted a pardon. He returns to Osage County, living in a trailer park with his brother Byron. After divorcing Ernest, Molly, now known as Molly Cobb, remarries and settles on the reservation. She succumbs tragically from diabetes at 50 in 1937 and is buried beside her family, including her parents, sisters, and daughter. The murders remain unmentioned. The film ends with a sweeping aerial view of a 21st-century Osage powwow dance.